Podcasts are pretty common. So what makes the Uncommon podcast uncommon? Well, it's all in our name. I'm your host, Noah Weiss, and we at Uncommon Sports Group understand the unique pressures and temptations that come with a career in the sport industry. We provide uncommon training that helps you successfully navigate common challenges. Hit the follow button on this podcast. Follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Check out our website and become uncommon. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Uncommon Podcast. I'm your host, as always, Noah Weiss, and I'm excited to be joined today by the newly selected ADs for Christ President and the Associate Vice President and Chief Operating Officer at the University of North Texas, Dr. Connor Smith. Prior to his recent transition to North Texas in January of this year, Connor was the Director of Athletics at Dallas Baptist University for 8 years and helped lead the Patriots to their first ever Division II national championship when the women's golf team won the title in 2021. Dr. Smith, I really appreciate your time today.
I know. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. And Dr. Smith, I want to center our conversation today around your recent transition to North Texas. For a lot of young professionals in the industry, it's hard for them to know when is the right time to take a job transition or to know which job opportunities are the right fit for them. So with that, before we get into the recent transition phase of your career, I do want to talk about your 12 years working in the Dallas Baptist Athletic Department. What led you to have such patience over the course of your time at DBU as you climbed the ladder to the Director of Athletics position?
Yeah, that one's a unique one. I went to school at DBU. I went there in 2005 to play golf and then never left. Through my experience, my life-changing experience there, through relationships and friendships that I had built with leaders on campus, coaches, athletics administrators, a position was extended to me right after graduation. And, long story short, after working in a few different departments on campus with what I would consider some of the greatest leaders in higher education or for any organization that I've been around, was extended an opportunity to be an interim athletic director at the ripe age of 26 years old, not knowing what in the world I was doing other than showing up to work every day, building authentic relationships and working as hard as I could. And so, some could say that, a 26-year-old has no business being an athletic director with a Division I baseball program and 14 Division II sports. But I would consider myself undeserving, but very fortunate and lucky to be extended that opportunity by a few of individuals that I would call my role models today and heroes and champions in my life. And so the patience piece of that, I think I don't know if it was patience or more just being provided an opportunity that's very uncommon, and just trying to do my very best and build relationships and strive to produce transformational experiences to our student athletes like I had when I was a student athlete. And so my story is kind of DBU and what that university produces or strives to produce. And my life was changed there, forever changed there. So I'm not sure if it was a patience deal. It was just a really unique, fortunate situation, and wouldn't trade for anything in the world.
That's amazing, Dr. Smith. And I think it's really unique, as you mentioned, that you spent your undergrad as well as a large part of your career thus far at DBU, and really just that consistency. And truly, for our listeners, I think so often they can think that, you have to be continuously going to different universities, different experiences are so valuable, and oftentimes we value that. But it's hard to, as you mentioned, to look past the value of relationships. And certainly you built those relationships that have lasted at DBU, and it really did certainly assist in you reaching those heights at that university. And Dr. Smith, kind of on that note, you had the unique opportunity of being the director of athletics at your alma mater, as you mentioned. Share with us just what those 8 years at the helm meant to you and for your career as a whole.
Yeah, it was personal, right? I mean, as I mentioned earlier, I mean, my life was changed by that university and from the people at DBU. I mean, a countless number of individuals. We don't have the time, but I could
Yeah.
just, name several of them. But being able to serve at a place that, help shape and transform your life, it is personal. And so I think the passion, what I would wake up every morning looking forward to, is trying to build that athletic department into the best athletic department that it could possibly be. And of course, many failures and mistakes and roadblocks and barriers, et cetera, along the way.
Yeah.
But getting to serve at your alma mater it was a dream come true. I mean, I'd never envisioned that I would ever work in higher education. In many years, if you would have asked, I would have said, I still don't know what I want to do when I grow up. And just took those opportunities as they were presented and did the very best that I could, and tried to elevate in partnership with all of our coaches. I mean, we had, what I would regard as some of the best coaches in the entire country, from many different sports, serving at the same place. But yeah, it was personal. I mean, I think when that's the case, you don't want to screw things up. You don't want to let people down. You want to make your alumni proud. You want to make your former teammates proud. You want to make, and while that's not the only thing we're striving for, because, at the end of the day, as believers, right, we're working towards a common goal, and we're looking to give God the glory, and working for Him and not for man. And so, but I think I would categorize that as it had that personal, special piece to me that that helped drive a lot of that passion and energy and effort towards doing some special things.
Absolutely, Dr. Smith. And I was thinking, as you were sharing, of how personal that would be to be a part of the athletic department you once played for, as well as once attended as a student. And so just that unique passion you would have to strive to be your best and to serve there. I think that's a huge blessing for you. Obviously, it's done wonders in your career, and God has used that. And just really an awesome part of your story is being able to be the director of athletics at your alma mater. Such a blessing. And from an outside perspective, Dr. Smith, I feel like everybody would say, well, you're going to start and finish your career at DBU. And just would love to hear from you, as we're talking about transition today. When did you realize that you may not finish your career as a Patriot, and how did that sit with you at first?
Yeah, I as a believer, you never know. One of the probably one of the most special things in my life, and experiences per se, was being given a book and going through kind of a small group with the former president at DBU, Dr. Gary Cook, who's a champion and hero and role model and very close friend of mine still. But he went through this book with several of us called Experiencing God. You may have read it before, by Blackaby. And it was really through that, right? Because we all kind of make our own plans, and we chart our own path and chart our own course forward. But one of my favorite verses, Jeremiah 29:13, you will seek me and find me when you seek me with all your heart. And so, I think, the Lord shows up in mysterious ways and puts different calls on your heart. But, I think, to agree with you, I think, my thought was that we would spend the rest of our lives at DBU from a professional standpoint. The Lord had put something on my heart, and, opportunities present themselves, and maybe some of the most unexpected times of your life, personally and professionally. And so, the Lord certainly has a path for all of our
Mm,
lives, and he had um, wanted to exit the highway and jump on a different highway and
mm,
start pursuing a different challenge and an opportunity. And so, in many ways, um, we all, like I said, we all have kind of our own
mm,
plans and goals and aspirations and things that we want to do. But the
mm,
Lord continues to show up and say, "Hey, I've got something else for you over here. I'm going to stir up this restlessness in your heart, and I want you to listen to that. I want you to
mm,
follow that. I want you to dig into that." And so,
mm.
it's hard to know what that is unless you pursue Him and seek Him, as He says there in Jeremiah 29:13.
Mm. I really appreciate you sharing that, Dr. Smith. And I love it from the faith perspective because, we always, as humans, especially as Americans, we love to plan our lives step by step and have a foolproof plan of this is where I'm going to be in X amount of years. This is my goal. This is where I think I'll be. But so often we see in Scripture and in our own lives that those plans often don't turn out as we thought. I always think about Paul, and before he was Paul, he was Saul, and he was a Pharisee, and he probably had aspirations to be a chief priest or to be something of that nature. And certainly that didn't turn out right. He became a missionary for Christ, and that's amazing to see how God used that. And so obviously on different scales we can have those Paul moments in our lives, and we can have those change of directions. And so I think for you, that's why I love your story, is there's that transition was something that wasn't expected and that God really did work through. And on that note, Dr. Smith, I would love to just ask, when did you really feel like, or how did you get clarity from the Lord that this is where He wanted you to go? I think for so many of our listeners, it's hard to decipher our own voice from God's voice, and is it my calling or is it God's calling? How did you make that? How did you understand that from like deciphering God's voice from your own in this transition?
Yeah, and that's the difficult thing, and it starts with, right, the conviction that the Lord puts on your heart,
Mm,
and that feeling that He gives you, the promptings that He puts on your heart. But I also think He puts people in your life for a reason. That's friends, that's close family, that's loved ones, that's mentors, and other leaders that you've had the opportunity to grow in relationship with. And I say, for me, it's always been, I'm a big believer in what the Lord has called for us to
mm,
be in community, and have always valued that. Faith, family, and friendships is one thing. Those are kind of the three pillars. Other than college athletics, you could add that in there, but faith, family, and friendships are kind
yeah,
of the three F's that I've always
it's great.
really stood on. And the faith component, obviously the Lord stirs up that in your heart and puts that conviction on your heart, and you better follow that. The older that I've got,
Mm,
the more that I've kind of submitted to, if the Lord puts something on your heart or gives you a feeling or prompts you in some way, you better sure follow that and listen to
yeah.
that. Because that is, Him speaking in and through you, or maybe it's in and through others. But family and friends, especially friends that have become like family, are very, very important to both my wife and I.
Mm,
And so it was really those three things
yeah.
that kind of helped shape. And
Mm,
and then at the end of the day, you've got to make a decision,
mm,
and trust that whatever you feel that the Lord's put
mm,
on your heart, and counsel from others is allowing you to see it from all these different angles. But you got to make a
mm,
decision. And I've always been one since I've been a little kid.
mm,
Um, growing up in the driveway, acting like you're Michael Jordan, with 10
yeah.
seconds left. Like, I've always been a big dreamer
Mm,
too, right? So like there's a part of me that always wants this next challenge, that's what always
mm,
wants this next opportunity. And so that plays into it as
mm,
well. Just kind of that little kid, that little dreamer, at heart,
yeah.
of wanting to step out and
Mm,
take a chance and take a challenge.
mm. I love that, Dr. Smith. And really, I love the point too, where, God does give us promptings and He does give us direction through His word, especially. I always tell people, right, God has only shown Himself in visions to very few people, right? There's those choice people that He does show up in visions or dreams to, and gives them that direct clarity. But for the rest of us, how do we navigate these things? And it's God's word, right? God's word and prayer and wise counsel in our lives, kind of as you touched on. And I think those things are so vital as we walk through this industry of what's best for me, what's best for my family and my faith, and trying to have people around you, especially God's word, to really guide us. So I love that. And I did want to ask a follow-up question, Dr. Smith, is from a professional standpoint, how did you determine that North Texas was the place for you based on what they offered and that new challenge as you talked about?
Yeah, the people. The athletic director, Jared Mosley at the University of North Texas, I'd known for over a decade, and several of the other people here.
Mm-hmm.
An individual that serves, him and I have served on a board for 5 or 6 years together, other individuals that I had known before or knew through other friends in the business. But I think, the people, I think that'd be the short answer. Great people who share a lot of the same morals and values and want to chase relentlessly chase excellence and strive to be the best. And so, the people were something that I wanted to be a part of. And it's here in the Metroplex as well. My family lives in Austin. My wife's family lives in Houston. And so we're still, just a few hours away from each of them. And so
yeah,
I would say ultimately the people.
That's great, Dr. Smith. And so often I think from an outside perspective, you see that people make moves based on the size of the conference that the school plays in or the amount of championships they have or the gear that you might get. Those kind of things is what we always as outsiders perceive as the reason why people make moves. But oftentimes what I've heard is that it's people, right? It's more about who you work with and going to a department where you might feel more comfortable or whatever that might be. So I love that answer. I think it is for our listeners. It's bigger than sometimes the championships or the brand, right? There's more reasons to why you want to look at a position in transition. So I love that perspective. That's obviously the more mature way to look at a transition as opposed to those other reasons. And Dr. Smith, you did mention family, and outside of being a director of athletics and working in an athletic department now, you are also a husband and a father of 2 children. How does your family play into this decision to make the transition to North Texas? And for our listeners, how much should family and personal reasons play into making job transitions?
I'm sure that folks all over the country maybe have different ways that lenses that they look through when making decisions. Mm-hmm. Family, if you look at it from your immediate family standpoint, I know, the age of kids is always been a factor. My 2 girls are 7 and 4. And so it was, a time where, young kids like that are resilient, to where, it wasn't going to be as significant as maybe, kiddos that are in high school or getting close to graduation and you've been at a place for quite some time. But, family is everything to me, as I mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
I come from a family of, we're a sports family. My dad played college basketball. Mom played college softball. My brother played college golf and played some golf professionally. And,
wow.
And so college athletics is always something that has been a big part of our lives. And, we always grew up with a tradition of any time that we'd travel, across the state or to see family, we'd always stop in and check and see if there was a gym door open just to look, or a stadium door open at colleges and universities. And so I say all that to say, extended family, mom, dad, are individuals that I've always seek counsel from, and have a pretty broad understanding of college athletics and what that looks like. My wife is, my best friend and kind of a champion for me. And she's a rock star. She was a college athlete as well and was a college coach for a couple of years. And so, having that support system, obviously is something that was important to me. But I think everybody's different. I mean, I think ultimately, when you're making transition decisions, I think the big question is, what do you want? What's your end goal?
Yeah.
And then maybe try to work backwards from that. But at the end of the day, it's what do you want because for me, I've always kind of looked at it wherever I'm at, I want to work alongside people that I enjoy working alongside,
Yeah.
leaders that I enjoy serving under.
Yeah.
Um, and then, what are you trying to do? I mean, I've always looked at jobs, and this is as I've got older, just as a ministry, and an opportunity. And so that rambling a little bit and maybe a longer answer, but more or less, I do think, at the end of the day, you kind of make decisions kind of with your end point in mind, and try to work backwards from that. I think one piece of advice that I was given several years ago is really, if you're open and considering making a change, where are the places that you want to go? Who are the leaders that you would love to work for? And so kind of think of it through those lenses, and build authentic relationships, build your network, and always kind of have a kind of a calculated approach to it. I know there's some folks who may take opportunities all over the country, but I think at the end of the day, it all kind of starts with, what do you actually want? What are you looking for? What motivates you? What drives you? But kind of start with an end in mind, and try to go about it that way.
Oh, that's awesome, Dr. Smith. I really do love that. And really, I think the point that I want to highlight that you mentioned is that motivation. What is the driving force in your career, and how can you achieve that, right? And certainly, as you mentioned as well, as you want to keep it in God's perspective of what does He want for you, and how can you marry those two things together, if your desires and God's desires. So I love that point. And two, on the family front, I know I think it's so hard for our listeners because not many of them have families yet, and it's not really a consideration for them right now. But certainly as you mature in your career and you have to make these decisions, that does play a role, and it can be so challenging. But I love for you that obviously you stayed in as you mentioned, the Dallas area, to honor your family in that way and stay close to them. And I think that's just something that our listeners at some point are going to have to process. And so, love that point. You mentioned too, just the reality of North Texas and the relationships. But one big difference between DBU and North Texas is the faith component, right? Obviously, DBU being a Christian school by nature, North Texas being a secular school. And so we'd love to hear from you. What have been some of the biggest differences and even challenges that you have faced transitioning to the public school environment? How have you navigated those so far?
Yeah, I mean, they've been really easy. I think sometimes, and especially when I was a DB for so long, you don't know what you don't know. But as you build relationships with individuals, or believers that show up to work in corporate America, or the marketplace, different organizations and businesses all over the country. I mean, as I mentioned, there's great people here at North Texas. Other than the simple difference of being at a small private, unapologetically faith-based institution, and then transitioning to a large public institution. There's obviously some just some natural differences there, but
Yeah.
to me, the mission stays the same. For me, is striving to build relationships, treat people like they want to be treated, leading by example. And so I'll be completely honest with you. That's important to me, being around other like-minded people. But at the end of the day, you got to keep the main thing the main thing. And wherever you're at, and if we feel that this is where the Lord called us to be, then that's exciting. Very incredible transition so far, but that's one of those ones that I've always maybe leaned towards being in secular environments and being in public environments and being in places. And that's just kind of how I grew up. I mean, I think sports plays a huge part of that.
Yeah.
And I think that's the unique thing about college athletics or professional athletics. Sports is such, it's the greatest platform in the entire world. Regardless of where you're at, sports is a vehicle to be able to build relationships, advance the kingdom, to be able to bridge gaps for people from all over, from all different backgrounds can come together. And, we just so happen to get to work in kind of the business of sports and the administration of sports. And so to, to me, while all of that stuff matters in terms of the differences, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. We get to be in sports driven industries and get to be on the business side of it. And so that all may not make sense, but in my mind, yes, it's a transition from one type of organization to another type of organization. But the main thing stays the main thing, right? You still have to show up every day. You still have to serve. You still have to be a great teammate. You're as believers, you're trying to advance the kingdom in the many ways that the Lord provides for you every day. I mean, that's going to look different every single day, and it's an opportunity, from my perspective, maybe to witness to or get to serve in some capacities that maybe I wouldn't have gotten the opportunity to do that at the former institution. So that's kind of the lens that I look through it. May or may not make sense, but that's kind of what's on my heart.
No, I love that, Dr. Smith, because there's such a challenge in the minds of, I think, young believers of, oh, well, a secular school will shut me down from doing ministry. And I think that's totally not the case, as it's the opposite almost of it opens up more opportunities being around maybe some non-believers that you wouldn't be around at a Christian school. And kind of a follow-up question, Dr. Smith, if you don't mind, we'd love to hear from you for our listeners. How can they be open about their faith in a public school environment? I think that's often a challenge is, well, I'm at this public school now, there's maybe different requirements or different things that I can and cannot say. So how can they be open in their secular school environments with their faith?
One of the greatest, and I'll probably screw this up, one of the greatest things or pieces of advice that I ever got was the greatest form of worship is the way that you lead and the way that you work. And there's no better way to honor the Lord and to glorify Him than with hard work and then the type of person that you are, who's the person that's showing up to work every single day, the effort that you give. And so that's the first thing that comes to mind. The leading by example piece, even though that's very cliche, I think that's so important in the way that we treat one another. And so wherever we're at, regardless of maybe the institution or the organization that we have the opportunity to come to work to every day, I think it's the way that we work and the example that we lead are the two greatest forms of worship. I mean, there may be opportunities for you to be able to witness in certain ways, and it's not like we're going around and pressing maybe our faith upon individuals, but it's who we are. It's the example that we set, and it's the quality of work that we do. I think that are some of the most important things that we can do as believers, regardless of where we might show up to work every day. And so, and I always think back to mission trips. We had the opportunity. I had the opportunity to be on about 14 or 15 of them during my time at DBU, and we would take our student athletes and our teams overseas to serve internationally. And, every place that you travel to is different. You're able maybe to do a little bit more in one country, and maybe you're not able to do anything from an evangelizing standpoint in another country. And you've got to serve, and you've got to love, and you've got to work hard, and you've got to be present. So there's so many ways, I think, that we can shine a light on the kingdom and shine a light on Christ without maybe words coming out of our mouths. And I'm a big believer in that.
Absolutely, Dr. Smith. I love that advice. And it's so true, right? I think there's an element of, yes, we need to share our faith in those certain opportunities that we're given, but I think one of the best ways, as you mentioned, is character and competency, right? Of having high character and doing your job well. Great ways to honor Christ. So I love that feedback. And I think for our listeners, there's almost a pressure, right, of I'm in this environment, like I need to be like super vocal every day about my faith. And yes, there might be moments where you should be vocal, but it doesn't have to always be that way, right? Live the life that Christ has called you to live, and honor him in your actions and in how you work, as you mentioned. And when those opportunities arise, which they might, and I honestly will in most cases, that's when you get to share. And so I appreciate you sharing on that. Really is a challenge for, I think, most people in every career field, but I think especially in sports. So thank you for sharing there. And Dr. Smith, would love to hear from you as our young people make transitions, right? Especially as you start your career, you're bound to have to make a lot of transitions, really from internships to GA positions and et cetera, et cetera. What advice would you give a young professional who is considering or making a job transition right now?
I think maybe I hit on it a little bit earlier, just about what do they actually want. Your first job is not going to be your last job. Of course, each opportunity that you're provided, you do a very, very good job, and you leave that a lot better than how you found it. And I think opportunities will follow those who make the most out of the opportunity, right? And I'm also a believer in, I think in today's world, oftentimes folks can get stuck in the trap of maybe chasing finances or chasing larger salaries. I was always a big believer, if you want to get paid more, do more than what you're paid for. And seek out opportunities maybe that individuals don't want to do, and kind of run into those head on, run into those fires head on. But I think dream big. I think maybe this is a Mark Batterson quote, and I'm sure I'll screw it up, but kind of go after a dream that's destined to fail without divine intervention. Go for those big goals, go for those big dreams, and try to be very intentional about those moves and the path towards that, and seek the Lord. It's that Jeremiah 29:13, seek him with all your heart. You're not going to be able to get promptings, or the Lord's not going to be able to speak to you if you don't listen. And how do we listen? How do we take that step back? How do we really think deeply about where is it that I'm wanting to go? What do I want to do? And maybe you don't know that. Maybe it is you want to work at a large institution. Okay, well, chart a path and a plan for that. Maybe you want to be at a small institution. Chart a path and a plan for that. Build those relationships. Kind of put feet to your prayers and steps to some of those thoughts, and think through it that way. I had always been somebody who's like, okay, well, this is what I want to do. I'm just going to work hard, show up every day. And while that's very important, I do think as folks are trying to think through their career, especially as they start to have a family, is, be very intentional about what that looks like. But ultimately, it's going to come down to, what do you actually want from a professional career? I mean, what's important to you? What matters most? And I think if you're going to look at it through that lens, I mean, that's going to help kind of guide some of those steps. And so, the fundamental stuff, I'm a big believer in kind of the fundamentals. As I mentioned earlier, you show up, you work hard, you treat people like you want to be treated, regardless of the circumstances. And you build authentic relationships. And I think great things will happen. A lot of things will take care of themselves, but I think building a plan as best as folks can from somebody who that's out of my nature. And but like when you start to kind of look at it that way, I think that'll at least help.
Absolutely, Dr. Smith. That's so good. And I really do think for our listeners, that is a challenge, right? And I loved your point too on the financial aspect of it. That is, I think, such a temptation is chase the money. But obviously as believers, that's not the ultimate goal. It matters, right? There's a place for it, but it's not the ultimate goal. And so really having an ear to listen to the Lord, right? Not to tell him, God, I want to do this, so get me there, right? It's like, no, God, what do you want from me? Like, how can I be obedient to where you're calling me? So great advice there. And I think for our listeners, that is very beneficial for them as they continue pursuing these careers in college and pro sports. And lastly, Dr. Smith, for our listeners who are unfamiliar with ADs for Christ. I mentioned it in the intro, but obviously you are now the president of ADs for Christ. I'd love for you to just share a quick snippet about the ministry as well as the impact it has had on your faith journey.
Yeah, so the ministry started 7 years ago by three individuals: Lee DeLeon, who's now at Middle Tennessee, Tommy McClellan, who's at Vanderbilt, and Jay Jacobs, who's at the University of Florida. And in short, the ministry strives to advance the kingdom through college athletics. And so there's been a summer event every year in July. The one coming up is July 14th and 15th at Belmont University in Nashville, Tennessee. We also do a Friday fellowship where we have a speaker, once a month that comes on and provides a devotional or encouraging message. But like other ministries across the country, whether it's FCA or Nations of Coaches or Athletes in Action, our target and our mission is for the hearts of college athletics administrators. It's a tough business. It's a grueling business at times. It's also a rewarding business, just from a relationship standpoint. But we're a 501c3 nonprofit organization, official organization with our own bylaws and a board of directors. And so adsforchristinfo.com is the website for if folks want to learn a little bit more. Yeah. adsforchristinfo@gmail.com is our email address. We are obviously on social media as well, but the heart of the ministry is service. The heart of the ministry is prayer, because we all know in whichever organization or sector you work in our country, we need more of the gospel, and we need more of kingdom advancers and those who have a heart for ministry in that regard. So that's just a little bit of the organization. I mentioned the website, but I've had it's been an honor and a privilege getting to serve on the board and in some different capacities, and it's certainly an organization and ministry that's helped change my life through relationships.
It's amazing, Dr. Smith, and I can even speak from experience on that. I've been to 2 ADs for Christ events in my time at USG, and I've really just been impressed with the first of all, the speakers, right? You guys have brought on some great speakers. Trent Dilfer was there one year when I attended and really loved hearing from him. And just really the fellowship that exists is really incredible. And even for our groups that have gone as young professionals, you guys have done a great job in pouring into them and giving them a chance to learn and network from you. So, Dr. Smith, as busy as you are, I am incredibly thankful for your time and look forward to hearing how your testimony will encourage the next generation of Christian sport professionals.
Hey, no, I appreciate the time. It's been an honor and a privilege, and happy to help.
If you want to get involved with Uncommon Sports Group and the mission that we are on to help you navigate the sport industry as followers of Christ, apply for our academy on our website at uncommonsg.org. That's uncommonsg.org. Be sure to catch new episodes of the Uncommon Podcast every other week on Thursdays at midnight Eastern Time. Until next time, we pray that you will strive to be uncommon by glorifying the name of God in whatever you may do. See you next time.